Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video, part 2 of how we handle trees. If you haven't seen part 1, which is more general information on when we can cover trees or not, taking photos of trees, and just general information on how we handle trees, please watch that video. This video, part 2, is how we write trees in Xactimate. So we're going to pretend in this scenario that we have some trees down at the same risk. This is going to be a tree on the dwelling, a tree on the detached garage, and a tree on the fencing. So let's take a look at these real quick. So what we need to do, and if you don't have an estimate from a contractor invoice when you get out there, or the insured hasn't done the work yet, you will need to estimate what it's going to take to get trees off of structures on the ground. That would be the cut and drop portion, and then what it's going to take to haul the tree debris away. You would need to adjust for that. So we're going to just pick some random numbers here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on being perfectly exact on this, but just for training purposes, we're going to move along and pick some quick numbers. So we have this tree on the house. We need to figure out how much it's going to take and what we think it's going to be involved in getting this tree off of the structure onto the ground. Number one, that would go under the dwelling coverage. And then once it's on the ground, how much we think it's going to take to haul off that tree, to cut it all up, put it in chippers, put it in trailers and haul off, whatever we think needs to be done. So let's say, I'm going to say just to go quickly here, it's going to take probably a couple of laborers with chainsaws up here to be cutting all of these limbs off real quick, getting them on the ground, making some cuts in this large trunk. I'm going to say 2 laborers probably at 8 hours each, so 16 hours of labor. Plus I'm going to add a crane to this because of the size of this tree, and we don't want to damage any other pieces of the property, and it would be, of course, impossible for workers or laborers to grab these large, very heavy cut-up pieces of the trunk and roll them off the roof. That would not happen. So 16 hours of labor and the crane on coverage A dwelling for cut and drop. Once it's on the ground for haul off, let's just make it easy and say those same 2 workers, 8 hours, so 16 hours to cut all of it up in small pieces, chip it, put it in the trailer, haul it off, whatnot. So 16 hours on the haul off. Let's go to the next picture of the garage. We're going to be a little generous and say it's going to take a couple of workers, probably 3 hours, let's say, probably to make the cuts and get this off. Probably not going to need a crane necessarily. They can probably get this off. We'll just say 3 hours. Again, we're not being perfectly accurate, but for training purposes, we're going to pick some numbers. So 2 hours, or rather 2 laborers at 3 hours, 6 hours. This would be under the coverage A dwelling extension coverage, getting it on the ground, the cut and drop. If it's a home site claim, for instance, though, or connect, that would be coverage B, other structures. So we're going to say 6 hours. Once this is on the ground, we're just going to make it easy and say the same. Those 2 laborers, 6 hours to cut it up and haul it away. Okay? Let's go to the next picture. This is the fencing. Again, we'll be a little bit generous and say maybe 1 guy or girl, 1 laborer, 2 hours to get this all away from the fencing and on the ground, cut and drop. Remember, we cannot now, once it's on the ground, on fencing and personal property, we can pay to take trees that have fallen on fencing and personal property off of those structures. That's cut and drop. We cannot pay to haul that tree debris away. So we cannot calculate that. So all we're going to pay for on this tree is 2 hours to get it off the fence and away from the fence so they can make the fence repair. That's it. Okay, so let's go write this. Now, before we can put the line items in, we need to set up the coverage. We're going to go through that briefly. If you need more information on details of how to set up various coverages manually in Xactimate, there's another training video for that. I highly recommend that you go take a look at that one. So to do this, to set up the coverage, we're going to go into Claim Info, over to the left on your navigation bar, and then Coverages and Loss tab, and then down at the bottom we have our coverage area. These are coverages that are already set up for us with affix claims. We're going to add a tree debris coverage. Remember, we have 3 coverages we're dealing with this on this particular scenario. We have the coverage A. That is going to be taking that tree off the house and getting it on the ground. Coverage B, or in this case, it's an AmFam policy, coverage A, dwelling extensions. That is getting that tree off of the garage and onto the ground. And also the fencing would go under that. And then the third coverage is what we're about to set up. This is hauling the tree debris away that we've taken off the house and only the garage, not the fencing, the house and the garage only. Okay, so let's set up the coverage. We're going to select Add Coverage. It's not in our list here because I'm going to show you how to set this up again as the other video of how to set it up from scratch, as you never had it. If you set up the tree debris coverage before, it will be in this list. But let's say you've never set it up. We're going to go from scratch. So we selected that button behind this menu, Add Coverage, then you're going to select Smart List. This little link here. This opens up our Smart List and Coverages window. This is where we can add coverages, select coverage and edit coverages. We can delete coverages we've set up before manually, but we're going to add a coverage. So we're going to select the Add button, name the coverage Tree Debris, leave these settings alone by default, just say OK. Now here is our tree debris coverage set up for us. So let's add it to the estimate. So it's highlighted, say OK. Here's our tree debris coverage set up for us. Now we need to put the limit in here. In this case, we're going to put $500. Typically, with most ISO policies across the country, including all of the AFIX policies, except the AmFam Advanced policy and some of the commercial policies, but we're dealing with homeowners policies, $500 is going to be the policy limit to haul that tree debris away. That means you might have 6 or 7 or 8 or 15 trees down on the dwelling, various parts of the fence, or rather not the fencing because we can't cover that, but say other structures in the dwelling. You may have it on the dwelling, the garage, some sheds, maybe an office or a shop on the property that we're covering. You may have many, many trees. We can pay up to the policy limits to take those trees off those structures and put them on the ground. But all of those trees on the ground that we take off, typically you're going to have a $500 limit. That means you're often going to exceed this limit, which means that now you can start thinking about applying absorbing deductibles. There's another video we have for that more in detail. We're going to deal with that a little bit here. So just remember that anytime you're exceeding limits, you can absorb deductibles, which basically means the deductible will not be applied to the claim. We're putting the deductible back in the insured's pocket. We're not subtracting out of the estimate like we normally do. That is usually going to occur very commonly when we're dealing with trees because this tree debris limit is so low that it's very common that we're going to exceed that limit by trying to pay to get all these trees hauled away. Real quick on the advanced policy, AmFam Advanced Policy, the tree debris limit, the aggregate total is $1,000, not $500, so they have a little bit more coverage limit. However, it is $500 per one tree. So if you only had one tree on an advanced policy you're dealing with, you still only have $500. If you have multiple trees, you have up to $1,000. But we're going to say this is like a standard classic AmFam HO3 or HO5 Gold Star $500 limit. All right, so now we set up our limit, set up our coverage. Let's go add the line item and take a look. All right, so we're in our AFIX trade-based estimating tree. Let's go down to the appropriate folder we're going to put the tree debris and the tree removal in. Here we go. Now we're going to go to our macros tab. You can do this manually, of course, but you do need to use these line items if you're going to do this by line item. I recommend that you get these macros that we provide. If you don't have all of these macros that Pacesetter provides for AFIX, please contact your manager or claim supervisor. We'll be more than happy to send you these macros. There's 90 macros that we send out. Very, very powerful and very useful macros dealing with just about anything you can imagine. We have another video, training video on how to use macros, kind of goes over some of this. So let's go down to the T's. We have 2 macros in this list. Tree removal, this is getting the trees off of structures, and the tree debris disposal. Okay, so first we're going to use this one. So we'll double click on this. In this case, we want to use all of these. We have 2 text notes, these 2 line items, and then under each, the actual line item. Again, if you're going to build this manually, you need to have these text notes set up properly, and you need to use this line item. These are the line items in the codes that you have to use for affix. DMO tree HR. This is tree removal and disposal per hour, including equipment. Okay, so let's go to the first text note. And in this case, we have 1 tree we're removing from the dwelling. This is already set up pretty good. You know, if you want to be perfectly accurate in your grammar, let's take the plural out and say allowance to remove a tree from the dwelling. You could say the tree, 1 tree, that's fine. If you wanted to be perfectly accurate, that would be the way to do it. Now we have our F9 note set up, so let's go ahead and put our hours in here. And we said that taking that tree off the house was going to be 16 hours for labor. So let's put here 16. It's already set by default to the correct coverage. Coverage A dwelling, no depreciation because this is labor only. So we're done with that line item. You'll notice sometimes it's a little quirk. It's been here for years in Xactimate. You click away from the quick entry and we have a little space in here. You can put a line item in here, although it will, when you click away and back, we can just make this disappear. Just click another room, back on this room, and now we're back to the correct sequence. So now we need to remember add a crane. So let's go into our search field, type in crane. You're going to have various cranes in here. Typically, you're going to use this 14-ton with the 65-foot boom extension. So if you need the 30-ton, fine. You may want to justify that in your narrative report. If you have some unusually large trees, this may be applicable. That's okay, as long as you can justify the reasoning. No problem. We're going to use this 14-ton. We're going to drop it in here. We're going to move it up underneath our house labor line items, and we're going to put our hours in here. It's per hour for the crane. We're going to say it's 8 hours at the job site, 1 day. That should be enough to haul those pieces of that trunk off and get it onto the ground. But when you're dealing with cranes, always remember to add some extra hours in there to get the crane to and from the job site. They've got to get the crane there and take it back to the yard. I usually add about an hour each way. So we're going to add 2 hours to our 8-hour full day and say 10 hours for the crane. Again, it's already set by default correctly to the dwelling coverage. This is dealing with the house. We're good to go. So now we have our house done for cut and drop. Now let's deal with our cut and drop for the garage and the fence. So here's our text note. We're going to edit this. If you notice, the macro has a placeholder here. It doesn't have the names of the structure specifically. It just says allowance to remove trees from the, quote, structure. You will need to edit this, whether it's just the garage, the shop, the fence in the garage, what have you, which is what we're going to do now. Allowance to remove trees from the detached garage and fencing. Perfect. Now we have a good text note set up to explain that to the insured and their contractor. All right, so now let's go to our labor and put the correct amount of hours in here for the cut and drop. We said that it was going to be 6 hours to get the tree off the garage on the ground and 2 hours to get the tree out and from the fencing. So 8 hours total. But now remember, we need to change the coverage on this. This is not coverage A. This is going to be coverage A dwelling extensions. Different coverage we're applying this to, different structures. Again, if it's a home site or connect or MSA claim, Main Street America, this would be probably coverage B, other structures. No labor or no depreciation again, because it's labor only. So now we're done. We have 8 hours set to the correct coverage. Now we need to deal with our tree debris disposal. We said that was going to be 16 hours to haul off the tree debris that we took off the house and 6 hours for the tree debris taken off of the garage only, 22 hours total. So now we're going to go into our open line item, go back to our macros, and select our other macro for tree debris disposal. We're going to allow all these duplicate items. That's fine. Now we only really need, in this scenario, we're only going to need these 2 line items. We're going to change this a little bit. So let's just delete the last 2. But again, we're going to need to edit these text notes. So let's look at this text note. It says, allowance to cut up the tree that fell on the dwelling and haul that tree debris away from the premises. Well, this is not just for the dwelling, it's also for the detached garage. So let's add that. So allowance to cut up the trees, plural, that fell on the dwelling and detached garage and haul that tree debris away from the premises. Now, again, we set up an accurate, thorough text note for the insured and their contractor to let them know what this next line item is allowing for. And we have 22 hours. Now, remember, we have to set this up under the other coverage, the new one, tree debris. So we have to drop this menu down and set the line item to tree debris coverage. Okay, we are good to go. Now you'll notice that we're going to exceed the limit. Remember, the limit for this was $500, but we're saying it's going to cost $2,480 to haul all that tree debris away. So we're way over the limit, roughly about $2,000, $1,900-ish. In that excess, that $2,000 or $1,900 excess over the limit, we can absorb that deductible if it's under that. And we'll go look. In this particular claim, our deductible is $1,000. So we can absorb that entire deductible in that $1,900 excess. In other words, it will not be subtracted from the estimate. Let's go take a look at this now and see what this looks like. This is our, Xactimate telling us and notifying us that we have exceeded a limit. Yes, we know that. Xactimate, thank you for letting us know. We know we've exceeded the limit. Let's go take a peek at the estimate. So here we have our Coverage A dwelling standard stuff. Here's our Coverage A dwelling extensions. If we had no other line items that we were actually paying for, this should be just the tree that we took off of the garage and the fencing. That's what this is right here. The amount that we took off of the house is going to be in the Coverage A dwelling. Remember, we had that set to this coverage. And then now here's our tree debris, $2,400. But look what Xactimate's done automatically for us. It's moved the deductible that we normally would see up under the dwelling coverage, and it would be subtracting $1,000 deductible from this $20,000, which would leave only $19,173 to the insured. In other words, we're taking $1,000 out of the insured's pocket. But since we're exceeding this limit by about $1,900, $1,980.28 to be exact, Xactimate is moving the $1,000 deductible down into this coverage and applying it here into the excess. And it's saying, nope, we're not taking this out anymore. We're going to pay the limit of $500 for the tree debris, which is the policy limit, and we're not deducting the $1,000 out of any of the other coverages. So basically, we're putting the $1,000 back into the insured's pocket. Very, very powerful tool here. And you would always want to let the insured know this. This is great information for them. Let them know how this works and that they're not having to pay their deductible on this claim because we can absorb it in the excess. So I hope that makes sense. Again, as always, if you have any questions, contact your claim manager or claim supervisor. They'll be more than happy to help. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you on the next video.